Welcome back to Talking Europe. In the EU, overall, the expected duration of our working lives has increased by almost 2 years in the last decade. That's according to recently released statistics from Eurostat. A longer working life then for many, but at what cost? In this half of the show, we're going to look at the mix of working conditions across the EU. Could a 6-hour work week lead to happier staff and higher profits? Sweden seems to think so. Why did French women walk out of their offices at precisely 16 hours and 34 minutes on November the 7th? And where are the countries that have the hardest workers and why? To help us decipher all that, we are joined by Maria Rodrigues. You're a Portuguese MEP. You're on the Committee for Employment and Social Affairs here in the European Parliament. So looking really at that topic closely. You're with the Socialists and Democrats, as is another of our guests, Ms. Inés Alia Sender from Spain. Now, we were also to be joined with a member of the Conservative Party. They fortunately had to drop out at the last minute. But also to give us an overall global view, we have Yannick Jarlot, Associated Director of Amming, an international consulting company present in 16 countries. And your job is really to offer businesses advice as to how they get the most out of their staff. Thanks to you all for being with us. Mr. Jarlot, maybe I will start with your good self in that case. What are the good ingredients to make people happy? And because if I understand correctly, the happier we are, the more productive.
I think the three main ingredients to have very happy employees in your company is to work on the work content. The first thing is very important. If your work is very interesting, you're happy.
Okay.
For example, a journalist. The second point, very important, is the workplace relationship between the different employers and between management and employers. And in particularly in the country in the south of Europe, the workplace relationship is very important for us. And the third point is the recognition. The recognition
when you've done
from the
good,
company to the employers. And maybe the last point is the most important things for employers and for the happiness at work.
Ms. Alia Sender, when we often look at these studies, we see that the northern European Union countries get the best in terms of, best employee statistics, the happiest, the most productive. Coming from Spain, how do you see it?
Well, it is also the best companies recognized by the workers, because the companies are interested in this recognition also by the workers, which is not the case mostly in the south, where the precarious work, the high young youth unemployment, and also the precarious labor conditions had made from stress and even an increase of accidents in the last since 2008, when the financing and economic crisis arrived like a rush in our countries. And since then, we have the new phenomenon of poor workers. I mean, the people that work for wages give not the possibility even for pay for an apartment or for their families. And at the same time, the managers are getting also very, very stressed and even burnout, because they are under pressure of their companies in order to demand their workers more for less wage and for worse labor conditions.
Ms. Rodrigues, I mean, you're looking at that, EU plans to improve, I guess, or relook at the working conditions. There are certain EU minimums, on a minimum wage, for example. Does that need to be raised, or, how many hours people should work? What is the EU proposing on this?
Yes, of course, we should set clear conditions for everyone being in employment, whatever the kind of job and whatever the kind of sector. This is exactly the purpose of our pillar of social rights. I'm now preparing as rapporteur of the European Parliament to make sure that whatever the situation, and now we have different kinds of jobs because of globalization changes, because of the digital revolution, for instance, which is bringing new kind of jobs. And we need to make sure that, first of all, people, they can really use the skills they could get during the education. And this is a problem in Europe, because if you think about young people, they have a very high level of education in average. And now there is a gap between their level of education on one hand and the content of jobs they can get.
But the fact that wages, Ms. Alia Sender, the fact that,
This is
fingers
the
often
first
pointed.
recognition. When you say the recognition is very important, the first recognition is to have a decent wage for what you are doing. And this is the first problem we have, because even with the minimum salary, which is one of our vindication and our demand at European level, it has been used in the latest months not to increase the level of the whole workers, which would be normally is the effect of establishing this minimum wage.
But the point of recognition, you could, let's see, on what depends recognition? First of all, on clear contractual conditions, working conditions. A decent pay, a decent time management, access to social protection, access to education and training, and the possibility to have a work-life balance. These are basic conditions we should guarantee for all workers in Europe.
But they're not being done, and there are certain minimums, like even, for example, maternity leave. I believe the EU has a 14-week minimum, but pay differs vastly across our EU countries. You know, the UK, you can get 52 weeks, most of them paid at 90% of your salary, but that tapers off. In other EU countries, you get the bare minimum. You know, do we need to push for that to keep people working?
This is a quite ugly story, I must tell you, because the Parliament could get a clear position on this, on the conditions for maternity leave, but also for paternity leave, because it's also for fathers.
What countries are lagging behind, Ms. Rodriguez?
Well, I must say that one of the countries which are resisting are Germany and UK.
Oh.
Because they are not open to make sure that whenever a mother or a father they need to leave to take care of the children, they have the appropriate conditions and they get a normal pay.
How much, Mr. Jallo, does that come into, you know, because firstly we do want the proper wage, we discussed that, but then how much of those other elements as time off comes into play, and how important is that to our productivity? Because again, we've seen in Sweden where they're saying the shorter the day, the actual more productive we are, something the French believe as well.
Yeah, I think there is different source of motivation. You know, I'm not sure that it is only the salary, the money. I think there is different points, and the source of motivation are very different in each country, because we have a different relationship with our work. We have a different economic context. A situation, and we have different culture in the company.
Increasingly, businesses are looking at the correlation between happy workers and the amount of work we actually do, so much so that some companies have created a new position, the Chief Happiness Officer, whose job it is to keep employees happy. Our reporter Anais Guérard went to meet with one to see what might, if anything, might change for staff.
They're accused of taking the seriousness out of work. Yet that's exactly what they're supposed to do. Happiness officers have made it their mission to bring light and joy to offices around the world by understanding the way businesses run and working out how to improve them.
It's obvious that promoting the independence and freedom of an employee is going to be a crucial factor. So what will this involve the company doing? Well, it could immediately call into question the company's hierarchy or management style.
It's this change of mindset that, unlike startups, older companies are finding hard to come to terms with. But focus has turned to workplace health since a wave of suicides at France Telecom and Renault in the last few years.
Something like that can really call into question how the organisation runs. Obviously, there's this aspect of co-working, which could go as far as changing the layout of the workspace.
We head to this bar in town, where a group of friends have come, not for a casual drink, but for a meeting. It's changes like this that managers might be reluctant to enforce, but that could, in fact, benefit their employees.
There's not one clear-cut definition for happiness. For example, happiness at work is different to the kind of joy you get from being at home. And unfortunately in France, we don't believe in finding happiness at work. Whereas the Danes have a word for that, Arbeitsgläder. That joy in the workplace is something that comes naturally to them.
Happiness officers have their work cut out for them. Many employees spend their lives looking for the secret to happiness at work.
The main reason employees come to us is to ask for help controlling their workload and their hours, and to say that working from home appeals to them.
Happiness officers pride themselves on being able to boost productivity in the workplace by up to 40%. It's no wonder countless businesses are joining the happiness revolution.
Well, there you have it, a chief happiness officer coming to offices across the EU, certainly a few in Belgium and France. Is this, Mr. Guérard, more marketing than anything else? Is it not more of a gimmick, or will this actually, are people really taking seriously the importance of happiness of their workers?
Yes, I think this subject is more and more important in our company. But I think the best practice is not to design one person to be the chief happiness officer. I think the best practice is to consider that all the managers have to be happiness officer, because if as manager you are convinced that if you made
good management in general,
if you made your team happy, your team is more efficient, you know.
Ms. Aliatender, you mentioned a little earlier the amount of women in transport, but women in general in the workplace. Now, we did see one of the reasons behind the lack of women could be what we're seeing people increasingly protest about. We saw in Iceland, women walk out at 2 p.m. On November 7th, there was a call in France at 4:30 in the afternoon to leave work because as of the 7th of November, shortly after 4 p.m., French women are technically working for free between then and the end of the year.
In general, yeah.
When you compare the salaries.
Yeah,
so,
this is salaries. This is part, but it is also the case that there are still a lot of obstacles during the crisis. There has been also a lot of obstacles because, well, no public services for kindergarten, for
support.
For children.
Still falling on women.
Yeah, and this was immediately part of the problem. And as you said, we are paid still
85%.
Absolutely less than men. And this is something that we absolutely is part of the recognition of the same work and also the capacity to be promoted at the same level as men.
I suppose that the level of happiness depends on having good care services, supporting women and men to reconcile with their professional obligations.
Of course.
This is a big sector which must be developed in Europe, which can create a lot of jobs and to improve the quality of life of everybody. And we have gaps of childcare.
Mr. Yarlow, would companies not reply by saying that's a very costly thing you're asking them to put in place for their employees, and why should they, or why would we, when it's already working far?
That's interesting.
I think it's a big problem in recognition. For example, in absenteeism rates, we saw and we see each year that the absenteeism for women is higher than absenteeism for men. So everybody said, oh, look, women are more absent than men.
And they have the children,
every time I said, but don't forget that women have two jobs. Even if whole modern guy like to say we have very modern family, I think we have not very modern family, because the woman, the mother, have a lot of job, more than
especially if a child
the
gets
father.
sick, that kind of last-minute scenario.
We have to change our mentality. We have to change our culture.
Why would employers change their mentality? Like, why would employers decide, well, okay, I've employed a woman, so I am going to, give her more leeway when it comes to this absenteeism?
I think the employers have to progress on one point, is the flexibility of the work,
How will they benefit from that, though?
Pardon me?
Will the company benefit as well? Because if I'm a businessman, I'm going to just see the cost of all of this.
Yeah, of course, even the benefits. But I think the flexibility is a very important point. For the moment, too much company have very fixed hours to arrive and very fixed hours to leave. But for example, I am manager. I have different kind of people. I have women, I have men, and for me it's very important to propose a very flexible work.
Now, we mentioned briefly as well another idea that is gaining a lot of traction, and it's burnout. You know, it seems to be a new phenomenon, but one wonders how new is it actually. A study commissioned by, I believe, the European Union back in 2012 said that burnout had an annual cost of something like 270 billion, and Belgium, I believe, passed a law on it in 2014, insisting on the, you know, the mental health and the physical exhaustion to protect their employees. How serious is the EU, first of all, taking it, this question of burnout? And then I'm going to ask how it can be avoided.
Well, again, it makes part of the general conditions for everybody to have good health and safety.
Is it new, burnout?
At work?
No, we have directives, European directives, to make sure that these health and safety standards are respected. Nevertheless, we need to update them. Because if we see now the new kind of jobs connected with the digital economy, the stress is very high, sometimes it's hidden, and we need to protect people from this. For instance, the so-called zero-hour contracts, where someone can be called up whatever the time in the day or the night.
It's illegal it's illegal in 10 EU countries, I think, this zero-hour contract.
Yes.
No? But it's still prevalent in other countries.
There are several gaps on the legislation because it's very new.
Well, I think I've concluded from this discussion that there's a lot needs to be improved in our work conditions across the EU. We're going to have to leave it there, but thanks indeed to all my guests for having joined, and thanks to you at home for having watched. To see you again. That brings us to the end of this edition of Talking Europe. Thank you.